Now you may place in your good mornings for roll call. Thank you very much. And as soon as you have placed your good morning, check in your Canvas right now and make sure that your lecture quiz 3 is showing up at the top of module 4, I believe it is. And once you can see that, just type in I see. I just want to make sure all the lab sections can see it. So get into your Canvas and check to make sure your quiz is present so that when I release you a little later, you'll be able to take it. And it should be on skin and bone. Once you do see it, please just type in the chat box, I see. And so far I'm seeing everyone saying, yes, I see, good. If you don't see it, let me know, because then I have to know the lab section where you cannot see it. So I can check on my end. Just to make sure it's still there. Okay, it looks like everybody is able to see it. So we're going to be up and running for our lecture quiz later. Excellent, excellent. Now, a couple of announcements. Next week, if you look at your calendars, next week, the week of the 20th, is practicum exam 1. And so you're all going to have your first practical exam. Coordinate with your lab instructor as to the time that you will have to show up to take it, and make sure you come at that time. It will not be the full lab period. It's only partial lab period. We take the exam and then that's it. If you can't see your quiz, put in your lab section number and I'll check on it, because I see someone that says I don't see it. What don't you see? Your quiz? Quiz should be there. If you don't see your quiz, type in the lab section number that it's missing from, and I'll go and have a look. Thank you. But next week, yeah, you have a practical 1 exam. And so get together with your lab instructor. Now, for my labs, I have 2 labs, one on Wednesday, one on Friday. I will be sending out an email. With regard to when you need to show up for lab practicum 1. Someone's like having trouble finding today's lecture quiz. I'm asking if you guys see a lecture quiz. I'm not talking about lab quiz. I said nothing about lab quiz. Lecture quiz 3 on skin and bone. Make sure you can see it. If you cannot see it, I need to know the lab section number when you're attending lab, so I can go and check that section. But it seems everybody can see it. I've only seen one person say, I don't see it. Well, I need to know the section number. And again, it's at the top of module 4. There's only a handful of people in here that it would be at the bottom of module 4, and they already know who they are. So that being said, okay, and then anything else? And then of course, next week on lecture quiz 4, it will be on the nervous system, on spinal cord and cranial nerves, kind of an overall quiz on the nervous system. All right, everybody can see their quiz now. Very good. And somebody has their microphone on. I heard a great big, it sounded like a guy clearing their voice. So again, please turn off all the microphones, please. So again, I just want to know if you can see your lecture quiz 1. I'm not talking about a lab, just a lecture quiz. Focus, focus. All right. So looking at my lecture outlines, I'm seeing, that we still yet to go through parts of the brain and spinal cord. So where I'm at is at the end of fluid spaces and the ventricles where we left off on Monday. And up on the screen, we see here that ventricular system that supports the brain. It's full of CSF, and the structures that create the CSF are called the choroid plexi, covered with ependymal cells, which are a specialized cuboidal epithelium. And the CSF is then created from a distillate of your own blood. So CSF comes from blood, your own blood. And it's this fluid that keeps your brain and spinal cord floating in its cavities, much like a goldfish in a bowl, a fancy, pretty goldfish in a bowl. And without that fluid, the brain would collapse in and on itself. Now, the spinal cord, and if I move, everybody see the PowerPoint move? I'm looking at a spinal cord diagram. If you see the spinal cord diagram, type yes.
Yes.
All right, thank you. So looking at the spinal cord, let's begin. Now, we have what we call a cervical enlargement and a lumbar enlargement. These are slight swelling seen in the spinal cord. Like here, it says cervical enlargement. And down here, it should be labeled the lumbar enlargement. You won't be asked to point it out on a picture. However, you will be asked about it. And so what is it? These enlargements are high densities of cell bodies. So these are areas where there's a higher concentration of neurons. And the presence of these neurons makes that spinal cord segment swell up just a bit larger than the rest of it. Now, how big is a spinal cord? A spinal cord is about the size of a number 2 pencil in diameter. I was surprised to see just how small the human spinal cord is. And the first time I saw one at dissection, I was like, wow. I thought a spinal cord would be at least as big around as your thumb, you know, and they're like, nope, nope, this is it. So it's like a number 2 pencil, or like a mechanical pencil. Very slender, highly organized. I mean, it's like deceptively simple looking on appearance, full of vascularization that's also well organized, and running through the center, the very center of the spinal cord is a little conduit, a little tube called the central canal. And it's through the central canal that the CSF is moved through. So the CSF moves not only down and around the spinal cord, but through it to an opening at its terminus. Now, the spinal cord stops at about T11, T12. So you can see this on your diagram on the screen. If we look at T12 and the alphanumeric designations of like T6, T7, C6, C7, those designate like cervical, thoracic, or lumbar number, whatever the numerical designation is. So at T12, which is the last bit of the vertebra, your spinal cord ends. So the lumbar region of our back in the vertebral column is full of this structure called the cauda equina. And cauda equina translates out to ponytail. It's a collection of nerves that come off of the end of the spinal cord. And it's a bundle of nerves, and it does remind one looking at, of a girl's ponytail, woman's ponytail at a time. There's a terminus, the actual end of the spinal cord is called the conus medullaris. The conus medullaris is the actual physical end of the spinal cord. The filum terminale is a ligament, and that ligament helped to secure that spinal cord all the way down into the coccyx, such as you
I believe you muted yourself or it's frozen.
I think he might have froze.
He might have got bounced off. It looked like he's gone.
Yeah, he probably got kicked out or something because that's what happens when the screen like automatically stops sharing.
I guess we'll have one of these mornings. I'm still looking for the thing in the outline. Do you know what page it is?
On the outline or for the PowerPoint?
The outline. I think the
The
PowerPoint.
outline, it's going to be page 31. Right on top, it says spinal cord.
Got
Do
a
you see
little
it?
Zoom class, don't you?
Huh?
Do you see what page it's on? 31?
No, I'm what it is my I winded up getting the syllabus lecture thing from the bookstore, and there's no numbers on it, but I'll just go through all the pages. Thank
okay.
you.
So it's on the top of the nervous system. So when you get to the nervous system section, there should be the second page.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Of course.
Let's see if I can get to it.
All right, I faded out. I'm back. Everybody see me now?
We see your name now. That's
Okay.
it. Okay.
All right. Okay. It had cut out. So hold on. Not a problem. Let me get back to my share screen. So apologies for the sketchy hookup here. They're doing construction next door to my house. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it or not. But if it does, I can understand why it's intermittent. But with all the heavy machinery rolling around. Okay. So we're at the end of the spinal cord. So let me get back to that screen. All right. There. Okay. Yeah. Get back to the share screen and zip it open. Okay, so everybody see the share screen again? Yes? Type in yes in the chat if you see it. You see the spinal cord moving up and down, everybody. Okay, good, thank you. All right, let's continue. Now, left off, let's see, conus medullaris, the filum terminale, and another ligament that's present that holds the spinal cord is called the dentate ligament. So I'm typing that in the chat box, dentate ligament. And so this is an additional ligament that holds the spinal cord very securely within the vertebral canal as it courses through. Now, columns and fissures and sulci will get to. The spinal cord is like the highway of the body. It carries information to and from your body, both motor and sensory. Motor means movement, so information to move anything. And then sensory, can you feel it? Can you feel the pain? Can you feel texture, etc.? So that's the sensory component. The spinal cord does not perform thinking or thought the way your brain does. Your spinal cord manages a lot of the autonomic functions, a lot of the automatic functions of your body. There's 31 pairs of spinal nerves, 12 thoracic, but before that, there's 8 cervical, 12 thoracic nerves. And we're talking about the nerves, not talking about the vertebra, but the nerves that are coming off, and they come off in pairs. A pair means 2. There are 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal. These nerves, as they exit, innervate your body, carrying that information away, and also are responsible for bringing information back to. We do have a very great nerve that comes off here, the sciatic nerve. The sciatic nerve. This nerve is very large. It's actually larger than the spinal cord itself. This one is about the size of your thumb, and it exits your hip up here. And in instances when you have some sort of swelling or trauma to that portion of your hip, you will develop a sciatica. And a sciatica is a compression injury. And so because this nerve swells, you're going to sense pain and burning all the way down the leg, down on even the little toe. It's very inconvenient. And it takes weeks for a true sciatic condition to resolve itself. There's no cure for it. You can go and have injections of cortisone to reduce the swelling, but that doesn't cure the damage. That masks the swelling, reduces it so that you can get some comfort from it, because having sciatica makes it very difficult to sleep. You can't position yourself comfortably enough to even fall asleep. It's that discomforting, that much of an ache. The way you would get it is by turning or lifting a weight unexpectedly on one side or the other that causes a sudden impingement of circulation, cutting off of the blood circulation to it, even just a few seconds. And then you're going to have, this sciatica as a result, as a big problem. All right. And again, if you have any questions, type them into the chat box and I will have a perusal. So someone's saying they can't hear me. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right. So if people can hear me, then yeah, my audio is working. The person that can't hear me might need to refresh their browser and come back themselves, and that's okay. You can leave the chat and come back. And we should still be here, leave the lecture and come back and see if that can fix it. Okay, and now they're saying they can hear it. Good, we want to make sure everybody can hear. Now, the definition of a spinal nerve. All right, it's got roots. So we've got a dorsal root and we have a ventral root. And so you have to know what dorsal and ventral mean. So here we have projected on your screen the roots that I was just speaking of. And so this whole structure here is a spinal nerve. These are ventral roots. And over here we have our dorsal roots. And I can tell this is our dorsum here with this structure. This is a dorsal root ganglion, and this indicates orientation of the dorsal portion of the spinal cord, this being the ventral. Here we see the spinal cord in section. And note in the drawing, we've got an organization of white area and gray area. The gray area is the gray matter. The white is the white matter. Gray matter is cell bodies and unmyelinated fibers. White matter is myelinated fibers. So it's in the white matter that we're going to see the tracks that are traveling. In the gray matter, we see all the cell bodies that are responsible for the function. Here we indicate the denticulate ligament, its presence along the cord that helps to secure it throughout. Here we see the presence of the meningeal layers, the dura mater, the arachnoid, and then the pia. These are present also on the spinal cord. A section, a cadaveric section that you see here, and we're looking through a cervical vertebra, we see the presence of the transverse foramen in the transverse process. Within the transverse foramen of the transverse process in the cervical vertebra is a vertebral artery, and it runs through the transverse foramina of the cervical vertebra. And so it helps be organized by it so that it doesn't develop any kinks, because this vertebral artery is what is supplying blood to your brain directly from the carotids on into your head. Now, here's our spinal cord proper. And you can kind of make out gray and white matter on here. If I enlarge this even more, it's about the extent I can get it on my screen. You can see a very subtle shading. And we also see a line here. And we see a line here. And these are going to be the fissures and the sulcus of the spinal cord itself. Here's the body of the vertebra, and here's the spinous process. The lamina here is not indicated on this diagram, but that's the lamina of vertebra. In neurosurgery, when they do a laminectomy, because they have to get into the spinal cord here, more than likely to help clean up any clotting or scar tissue around it. Maybe a small tumor might be growing on it. Depends, it just depends. A laminectomy is where they go in and remove the lamina of the vertebra so that they can get in there. Now, you're all familiar how small and delicate a cervical vertebra can be and how small and delicate the lamina is. And so that's a very small workspace for them to be able to get into and do any type of correction or close to reparative work. We don't truly know how to repair a cord so that it becomes fully functional. We don't have that technology quite yet. Now, a dorsal and ventral primary ramus. A ramus is a projection, a large projection that creates the spinal nerve. And I'm looking to see here, not on this diagram, so I might have one on another diagram. So hold on as we progress through and we'll see if we can find you some rami. Now, here on the screen, we have a section of the spinal cord. Again, we see the gray matter and then the white matter. Here we have that dorsal root ganglion. Here we have our ventral root. Okay, so how does it kind of all work? All right, you get a sensory receptor picking up a sensation. In this instance, it's a tack or a pin of some sort that is piercing the skin. And you pick this up, the message comes to the spinal cord, so this is sensory information, sensory neuron, passing through the dorsal root ganglion. And again, this is a dorsal root ganglion, and you notice there's a cell body here, indicating that there's going to be multiple cell bodies, making this a swelling. It interfaces, interplexes within the gray matter, and then a message is then sent out. So on a very limited level, your spinal cord is able to make judgment calls in so far as messaging. Then it will send your brain a message about what it has done. And you've all experienced this. I mean, it's a sensation that occurs so quick, you don't have time to think about it. You've already responded. And that would be in the instances of a reflex reaction. A reflexive reaction is something that you are provoked into. You have no control over it. It just happens. And then your brain is made aware of what has occurred. Now, in this instance, we see, a pin. All right. So if you're walking along, and let's say it's at night, and you've got small children, or you've got cats or dogs, those are your small fuzzy children, and they've left a toy out, and you come padding out the house, down the hall or whatever, and you step down, and it's got a little sharp spot to it. And again, you just woke up. You don't step down and then think to yourself, oh my, I have placed my foot down upon a sharp projectile. Something must be done. Otherwise, it will pierce my skin and I might possibly suffer an infection. So I must lift up my foot to remove the pressure from the projectile. You're not thinking that. You step down and then boom, your foot comes right back up and you're like, what was that? It takes you by surprise, that your foot jerked back that way. That's a reflex. That's this in action. Message went to your cord, and your cord sent out a message to your musculature, contract. There's something going on here. And so we've got to make sure we don't carry through into the movement into this. We must stop it. So in that instance, that is what a reflex is. All right. Any questions or comments? So we have a lot of unlearned reflexes. Like if someone makes a threatening move to our face, we kind of blink our eyes and jerk back. Now you can override any reflex. Humans can override any reflex in your body. It takes practice to do so. We also develop what are called a learned reflex, where you teach your muscles to react in a certain way in certain situations, like driving. A lot of driving is a learned reflex, especially if you're driving a manual transmission vehicle and you're having to shift the gears and put into first and second and third and fourth, all of that. You have to kind of think about what you're doing, but not overly so. If you overly think about it, then it kind of makes it difficult. But if you just sort of let it happen, your body remembers the movements and kind of does it kind of automatically. Like I drive a manual transmission vehicle, and I've been doing so for the last 20 years. And it's just second nature to me to drive it. I can't hardly even imagine driving an automatic vehicle where I just put my foot on the gas and go. I'm so used to working a clutch and a shifter and all of that, down and up shifting, as it's necessary to meet the conditions of the road. So again, at first it's difficult to learn, but now that I have learned so and I've developed these reflexes, it's very straightforward. And so you develop reflexes for many other things through your core, like playing musical instruments. Even walking and running is a reflex learned through the cord. You just sort of put it into motion, and then you can do other things like chew gum while you're running or walking, or, think about things, and a lot of people do this. They'll go on a walk to sort things out in their head, in their life. And after their walk, they've had a good think along with it. And so they're able to act accordingly, with whatever they have come up with. So you guys should try it. If you're at home and you're just jonesing to get up and out, go for a small walk somewhere that you feel safe at walking. It's relatively safe. And then sort your thoughts out and you walk at the same time. All right. So now I go past that. And we're still looking for a good Rami. Here we go. On the screen, see another section. In this one, we see the posterior dorsal ramus and the anterior dorsal ramus. These are just two branches that are being formed coming off of the spinal nerve. So ramus is just a fancy word saying, I'm a branch off the spinal nerve. And so you've got two for orientation's sake, dorsal and ventral, all right? Here, we have fibers called the rami communicantes. Rami communicantes attach a secondary cord to your primary cord in function. These are part of the autonomic nervous system. It's a chain of ganglia, so it's much more complex than just nerve fibers, but running parallel to your spinal cord exteriorly, we have these sympathetic chains, and it's theorized that maybe as humans continue and we don't kill ourselves off as a species, that this might indeed develop into auxiliary spinal cord and would adopt an auxiliary function such that if you damaged a portion of cord here, these would then step in to take over the functions of that segment of cord that gets damaged. And so you wouldn't suffer a full paralysis. And it would allow time for repair work to be done, but it's not sufficiently developed yet in our species, but it is present, and our spinal cord accesses information from it through these rami communicantes. Dermatomes. Ah, all right. This is a map of sensation. Now, it's multiple colors because we're looking at different parts of our spinal cord innervating these areas. We have the cervical areas, thoracic, lumbar, and sacral. And they're all color coded to those areas. And note, we have borders, definite borders, and the alphanumeric designations are the actual nerves coming off. So here, this is an anterior view, and here, this is a posterior view. Note that the borders are well defined, highly geographic, we say, in their organization. And this is the patch of body over which this spinal nerve has control, has innervation. So on your posterior elbow, that patch is governed by T1. Just superior to that area is governed by T2. Now, you don't have to memorize these at this level for yourself, but you go on and you went into graduate medicine, and let's say, especially if you went into medical school and you became a neurologist, a specialty, you would have to commit to memory all of these patches, all this pattern, and these nerves, because it would be your job to evaluate a patient for any type of paralysis in function or sensation based on these areas. Even as a general practitioner, you have to have a knowledge of these, because in, let's say, the infection shingles. Are you guys familiar with shingles? Anybody heard of shingles?
Yes.
Shingles is a viral infection left over from like chickenpox. It's kind of caused by the same virus. You never get rid of it. And the reason we never get rid of the shingles virus is because the virus lives in the spinal nerves. And when you get stressed, that nerve gets to be expressed itself. So when you become like a stress, like you're studying, or let's say you even got into a really big fight and you got really emotionally upset with the person, that's a form of stress. That virus then has a chance to escape, and it will erupt on the skin, and it will erupt in the exact patch to the shape of the nerve from which it comes. So when people suffer an outbreak of shingles, you can ask, okay, well, what area of the body is it? And they'll show you. And on the patient, you'll see, patches of what are called vesicles. And the vesicles are lesions in the skin that are fluid filled and highly infectious, because the vesicle fluid is full of infectious virus for this. And so if someone's undergoing an outbreak of shingles, they're very infectious with regard to these vesicles. So they shouldn't be touching anybody, kissing anybody, or handling anything anybody else is going to handle. If you work with somebody who's had a shingles outbreak at work, like in the hospital, you want to spray down your work area really well and wipe it down really well, because you want to kill off any lingering virus, because this is something you can't get rid of. It just keeps coming back. The most common form of a shingles outbreak is a cold sore. Anybody that's ever had a cold sore can tell you, they'll tell you where it comes out, because you can ask them, do you suffer cold sores? Like, have you ever had a fever blister on your lip or something? And oh yeah, where does it come out at? And they'll show the exact spot. They'll point right to it. Oh, it come out right here or here. And you ask, do you have a breakout here or anywhere else? No, usually it's isolated just to the lip here or there. They picked that up from somebody. It's a gift that keep on giving. So they caught that from somebody who was shedding at the time. And at that spot of the nerve where it enters, it's always going to exit. And you'll see it appear on them. During finals week, it's amazing. How many instances of cold sores you see break out on students because, you know, they're so stressed over studying, and if they indeed have this viral infection going in their body, they can indeed break out on their lips or anywhere else and suffer that eruptive pattern of a shingles outbreak. Also, you can determine by using small instruments like a small wheel that looks like it's used for cutting pie crust, and I've seen this, where they will run it over the surface of the area of the body, and they know that there's spinal damage, but they don't know what the extent is. And so they use it to help evaluate this. Now that we have non-invasive tools at our means, like, you know, CAT scans and MRIs, we can get a really precise picture of where. But back in the day, before this instrumentation existed, this was the best way we had clinically of isolating the area of the damage of the lesion to the spinal cord. And so they would run this over the surface, and you would have that sensation in that area or not. So let's say they ran it over here and they run it around your nipple and you don't feel anything, but then just a little bit superior, yes, you can feel. A little bit inferior, yes, you can feel that. So they could isolate it to T4 and say, you know, with a high degree of confidence, okay, this damage is localized to this segment of the spinal cord. So we need to be looking, you know, very closely at this area, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is why you see all the well planned out mapping here. And again, this is a dermatome map. As for the skin, we also have a myotome map, but I don't have any of those projected up here. Myotome would be for the musculature and its function. Now, back to the cord, it is composed of ascending tracts and descending tracts. You do not have to memorize the names of the individual tracts that are within your textbook or lab manual. All you have to learn is that ascending tracts carry sensory information and descending tracts are going to carry motor information. Again, that's for body movement. Note the organization of the spinal cord into columns. We call these columns. And these columns are what are going to carry the tracks, the highways. We have, helping to organize the cord, the presence of what's called a posterior median sulcus here. And then we have an anterior median fissure here. Fissures are larger than a sulcus. Sulcus, you've got like two folds of tissue right up against one another, and it looks like you could barely squeeze in like a dime or maybe even a piece of paper in between the two. Fissure is wider. You could definitely get like a nickel thick coin in a fissure, for that matter. And again, here we have our central canal. Presence of our ventral roots, our dorsal root ganglia helping to indicate our dorsum of our cord. So that's how looking at it externally help you to orient your field, so that during a lab exam, if you were given a model and you were asked without any other labels on the model, identify this or identify those, you could say with a high degree of confidence, well, I know the swelling is found in the dorsal root ganglion, and so there's no other swellings present except for this and that, so that's got to be what that is. Roots, well, we see them most prominent in the ventral roots. And so that's what you see here, the cord. So this whole thing here on the end is the actual spinal nerve here and here. Ah, the human brain. Okay. A nice quick overview. Am I still being heard? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right, good. Hasn't cut out yet. Excellent. Now, here we have our brain. We have a left brain and we have a right brain. If we look at a sagittal section of the brain, we first will note the brain stem. Brain stem composed of medulla oblongata, the pons, the midbrain, the cerebellum, and the thalamus. These structures, in large part, control that which we don't think about, that which is considered an automatic reflex. What are some autonomic functions in a human? Is thinking an autonomic function? No, thinking is not an autonomic function. So what's an autonomic function? Good. Anybody else? Someone put up, heart beating. Excellent. Anything else? What else would be considered autonomic? Breathing. Oh, excellent. GI, digestion. Yes, that's autonomic. Very good. Anything else? What else is autonomic? You don't have to think about, but it's maintained. Well, blinking is a reflex. I'm talking about like a whole system function. What else functions? Sweating. Very good. Sweating is also autonomic. You can't help it. It just sort of happens. It sometimes tells on you when you start sweating. Like if you feel guilty, you start sweating up a storm. You're like, gee. Sneezing, yes, sneezing is autonomic. Good. Anybody else? You guys are doing good. You're engaged. Anybody else? Come on, think about it real hard. Any organ function is true. Yes. Yawning. How about blood pressure? Blood pressure is autonomic. You don't think about that. You don't think about making pee, and yet all of you are doing that right now. You're making pee. You're storing it up in your urinary bladders. So it's things like that we don't think about. It just happens. And so this part of the brain is what controls all of that. If there's a damage to these areas, then you're in some serious hurt, because even the very fact of maintaining awareness is controlled in these areas. Sleep. Did you know that humans have an on and off switch? Yes, we have an off and on switch, and it's called the reticular formation. And it can be turned off and on. It can be turned off with a sucker punch square to the jaw. And this is when you see it in boxing, when they get that one punch that knocks them clean out. They have triggered the reticular formation, because what happens, and let me show you on the screen, is when this occurs, you deliver a blow to the brain. And so the person's jaw is like, let's say about right here. Okay, so there's all the muscles and bone that surround the reticular formation here. That blow, poof, as it's delivered, sends a shock wave of kinetic energy through all the tissues. And if it's of if it is such efficient force, that's how we get that knockout blow during boxing. It triggers the reticular formation into the off button, into the off switch. And so that's how you can turn off a human and cause a human to drop in its tracks. I'm just glad nobody has figured out the technology to develop into weaponry such that it can do that to masses and groups of people. Can you imagine you have a stadium full of people and all of a sudden you're hit with a blast of energy that causes this to trigger all at once? Everybody would pass out, knocked out. Like all of a sudden, the most, sudden sleep gas. You don't even have a chance to fight at all. There's no holding your breath. There's no gagging or forewarning. It just happens. So, oh, what other interesting tidbits about the brain? Now, pons means bridge. Pons means bridge. It's a physical crossing over between the brain stem and the rest of the brain. And let's look at the rest of the brain here. Cerebellum stand out really nice. It's the most posterior part of the brain stem. And there are these white venations that you see. If we enlarge the screen a bit here, we can note that they've made a careful application in the diagram of creating these white branched structures within the substance of the cerebellum itself. Well, these are called the arbor vitae. The arbor vitae, and yes, it is a feature that is also in your lab outline. So when you make a study of the models in the lab, you should note seeing this. This indicates the highly organized structuring of the cerebellum. The cerebellum is responsible for controlling your balance. So if you can dance, if you can walk reliably and comfortably, that means you have a nice functioning cerebellum. And again, the cells, excuse me, cells of the cerebellum are Purkinje cells. Purkinje cells. And these are multipolar. Sometimes they spell it Kinje, but it's still pronounced Purkinje. And so these are multipolar neurons. They look like a small tree. And it's responsible for helping to maintain your balance. If these become damaged, this is a condition that will result called cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy. You guys ever heard of that? In cerebral palsy, a person can't maintain balance really well. They can't even reliably drink from a cup of water. Their limb shakes way too much because of the instability of the neural control is just not there. All right, so you guys still with me with regard to the PowerPoint? Y'all can still see that, good, good. So we can see here the organization of our pons, where it's located with respect to our midbrain, with respect to our cerebellum and our medulla oblongata, where all these things are at. The thalamus is the most superior of the lot, because if you look back up along this, thalamus is even up superior to the midbrain itself. So as it's organized, we have our thalamus. And our thalamus coordinates emotive responses, emotion, controls your emotion, how and what you feel. Everything you experience is going to have some sort of physical feeling for you. You can't get away from it. That's part of being human. We have these very visceral, very intense feeling with regard to certain situations that occur with us. And so that's all coordinated up into the thalamus. Now, The brain itself, anytime you look at a drawing of the brain, you'll note a brain has all these folds. No brain drawing shows a smooth brain. Yes, you're taking a quiz today, but not right now. Patience, patience. It will open soon. Now, back to the board here. A brain has all these folds called the gyri. The little gaps in between them are called the sulci. So a normal brain is rich in gyri and sulci. The cerebral nuclei are collections of nerve cell bodies within the brain. Brain is composed of gray matter and white matter. The gray matter in a brain are the cell bodies, and that's going to be found exterior, a layer on the outside. The tracks are myelinated fibers running from the cell bodies to and fro, making interconnections within your brain itself, and those are found deep. So in the brain, we say the gray matter is superficial and the white matter is deep. Just like it says here, outer layer gray. It is converse organization in the spinal cord. In the spinal cord, gray matter is deep and the white matter is superficial. So learn the difference between the two. Now, the brain is, again, a left and right-sided organ. The two hemispheres of the brain are connected by the inner highway called the corpus callosum. It is a highway of inner tracks that allows you to have conversation with yourself regarding everything that's going on. Every human with a normal corpus callosum have internal head conversations. The fornix is a series of tracks that is going to carry the sense of smell back up into our brain. We have specific areas that control very fundamental functions, like we've got Broca's area that helps control our speech, and that's located here, just above the temples. We have a precentral gyrus and a post-central gyrus. Now, everybody's brain is folded in a different fashion, excepting for the presence of the central sulcus. There's a central sulcus here, and then laterally to our brain, we have the lateral sulcus. That lateral sulcus helped to define our temporal lobe. The central sulcus helped to define our anterior and posterior brain, and found anterior to the central sulcus is the precentral gyrus. Found posterior to this central sulcus is the post-central gyrus. Post-central gyrus control sensory information. Precentral gyrus control motor function. And that brings me to the great homunculus. What you are looking up on the screen is called a homunculus. Homunculus. The homunculus is a diagram of a human as it is mapped out in your own head. This mapping shows you how much priority your brain gives to certain parts of your body. Now, if you just look at it overall, everybody look at the picture. What looks really, kind of out of place are the size of the hands compared to the feet. I mean, the feet are really kind of small, and the innervation and the cell bodies for those things are found here and here. The hands occupy a rather large surface area of the brain for control. Also, look, the face. Oh my gosh, the face has these huge areas. Here in our precentral gyrus, we see that we've got a lot of movement capable with like eyebrows and the lips and the jaw and how we speak. And for sensation, the lips here and here. So it's no wonder that to, in terms of intimacy with humans, touching of fingers and hands, the face, lips, this really gets a brain's attention because of all the space devoted here to it. Now, my time is drawing to a close for this lecture. There's still some more information, but you'll need to cover that with the hypothalamus. And I'll try to talk about the engram and everything a little later, but take this and run with it. Also, I will have released, and I should have posted already in your Canvas, our lectures on the autonomic nervous system. You are responsible for that content, so make sure you listen to that lecture and take notes on it. Now, get ready. You're going to all take your lecture quiz 3. And I think everybody has checked to make sure they can see it. And so that will be opening up very shortly here. So if you haven't checked, I'd like you to go into your Canvas and make sure that you have lecture quiz 3. Someone says, I have 2 lecture quiz 3s. You take the one at the top of module 3. Most everybody in here take that version. The other versions, if it don't have your initial on it, that's not for you. So don't fuss with those. Those aren't yours. Only take the one at the top.